This is your morning boost, recorded in the Forward Ed Network studios. A weekly spark for educators and school leaders ready to lead, teach, and live with greater intention. This is your morning boost.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to your morning boost right here on the Forward Ed Network. I'm your host, Adam Bush, and I'm really glad you're here with us today. And I'll tell you what, here it is. It's August. Depending on where you're listening, maybe your teachers are coming back in the next week or two, or maybe you've already had that first staff meeting, but some of you already maybe have students walking through the doors. And for a lot of school leaders, this is the point in the summer where all of that planning we've been doing starts to become very real. The calendars we've been building are about to have people in them. And that means somewhere right now, there is a principal sitting in an office working on that opening staff meeting. The slides are probably getting longer, the agenda is getting tighter, and there are district requirements to cover. There are handbook changes, there are schedules, procedures, new staff members to introduce. And of course, there are the things that we actually want to talk about as leaders, too. We want people to understand where we're headed. And I've been thinking about those opening meetings because I think there's a mistake that's really easy for us to make. We spend so much time thinking about what we need to tell people that we don't always spend enough time thinking about what they need to understand. Those are two different things. And as leaders, we usually have a pretty significant head start. We've had leadership meetings, we've worked on our schedules, we've looked at staffing and data and talked with other administrators, and heck, maybe we've even been discussing a particular change all the way since April. We've had weeks, sometimes months, to make sense of where we're trying to go. Then everybody comes back in August and we stand in front of them and say, okay, let me give you a little background before we get going into what this is going to look like. I've done that. And it took me a while to realize what I was actually asking people to do. So today I want to talk about the difference between explaining a plan and creating shared understanding around it. Because I've experienced both, and I've learned that sometimes slowing down at the beginning is actually the fastest way to get where you're trying to go.
This segment is sponsored by Grunmeyer Leader Services. Since 2013, GLS has been a trusted partner for school districts across the Midwest, specializing in executive recruitment and leadership support. They believe that great schools start with great leaders, and they are here to help you find the perfect fit for your district. Transform your school's future with the right leader. Visit GrunmeyerLeaderSearch.com to learn more. Grunmeyer Leader Services, transforming education one leader at a time.
Now, early on in my administrative career, I was an activities director. I was only a few years into my career at that point, and I had a pretty clear vision for what at least I thought our activities and athletic department should become. I wasn't thinking only about individual sports or individual programs, I was thinking about our entire department. I could see ways that we could create a stronger identity across our programs, and I could see how we could build the department as a whole rather than having everything operate independently. And I'll tell you, I was really excited about it. The problem was, I could see it so clearly that I assumed everyone else could see it too. So when it came time to start making some of those changes, I did spend some time talking about the why. I mean, I explained the vision, I talked about where I thought we could go, but I hurried through it because I wanted to get to the work. I wanted to get to the nitty-gritty. Here's what's going to change. Here's what it's going to look like. Here are some things that we need to do differently. So let's get moving. And I remember being surprised when I didn't immediately have buy-in from everybody. Now, looking back at it now, I probably shouldn't have been surprised at all because I had spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about where we could go, but they hadn't. I had connected all of those dots in my own head. I could see how one decision connected to another and how those individual changes could eventually strengthen our entire department. But I hadn't given everyone else enough opportunity to make those same connections. Essentially, I'd shown them the destination and then immediately started handing out driving directions. And when people questioned some of those directions, I probably interpreted at least some of that as resistance. And I think that's pretty natural for leaders. I mean, we have an idea we believe in and we've thought carefully about it, so we bring it to the group. And when people aren't immediately excited about it like we are, we start diagnosing the people. They're resistant to change. They don't see the big picture. They're comfortable doing things the old way. And maybe, I mean, sometimes that is true, but I've become a lot more cautious about that conclusion over the years because sometimes what we call resistance is really just a group of people who haven't had enough time to understand what the leader has already had months to process. Think about that for a second. If I've been thinking about a change since April and I explain it to you for 15 minutes in August, why would I expect you to have the same level of understanding that I do? I had 4 months, you had 15 minutes. But because I already understand it, those 15 minutes feel incredibly clear to me. And that's the leadership trap I'm talking about here. We mistake our own clarity for collective clarity. And that's exactly what I did as a young activities director. Now, here's the important part of that story. We eventually got there. The things we were trying to accomplish were successful. We built a department in a direction that I had envisioned. And eventually people understood what we were trying to create. And eventually we developed the kind of collective direction that I'd hoped for. But it took most of the school year. We got there at a much slower pace than what we needed to. And when I look back at that experience now, I don't think the problem was necessarily the vision. The problem was that I was in too much of a hurry to implement it. I thought slowing down to spend more time developing understanding would slow down the work, but the exact opposite happened. By rushing the beginning, I slowed down everything that came after it. And that's something worth considering as we prepare for these opening meetings because August creates a tremendous sense of urgency. Students are coming. The calendar isn't moving for us. There are things that we have to get done. So when we're introducing something important, we naturally want to move towards implementation. What's the process? What's the expectation? What does everybody need to do? And those are legitimate questions. But there's another question that probably needs to come first. Does everybody understand what we're trying to accomplish? Not did I explain it, or not was it on the slideshow, not did everybody nod when I asked if there were questions. Do we actually have a shared understanding of the problem we are trying to solve in the direction we're trying to go? Because if we don't, everything that comes after that becomes much, much harder.
Are you ready to transform your school or classroom? Join hosts Adam and Jim on Control Shift Lead, the monthly podcast on the Forward Ed Network. Every episode, they bring in top educators from across the United States to deliver 3 game-changing insights: something you can control in your work, something that will shift your thinking, and something you can use to lead tomorrow. Don't just manage, lead. Subscribe to Control Shift Lead today.
Okay, fast forward, well, quite a few years, a lot more experience, and probably quite a few more mistakes too along the way. This time, I was leading a school building that included an alternative program, and we found ourselves at a point where some things really needed to change. Our staffing had changed, the needs of our students had changed, and when we really looked at how the program was operating compared to what our students needed from us, it became pretty clear that making a couple of small adjustments around the edges wasn't going to be enough. We needed a fairly radical shift in what we were doing. And alternative education is an interesting place to lead change because the work has to be incredibly responsive to the students who are actually sitting right there in front of us. We can design something that looks fantastic on paper, but if it doesn't work for the students we're serving, the paper doesn't matter very much. So into this particular change, I had some ideas. I had a pretty clear picture in my head of what I thought we should do. Earlier in my career, I probably would have walked into that situation, figured out what I thought the new structure should be like, and then bring everybody together. Here's what we're changing. Here's how we're going to do it. Here are the new roles. Here's what the schedule might look like. Let's get started. But this time I approached it differently. Before we spent much time talking about what we were going to do, we spent a lot of time talking about why something needed to change in the first place. And when I say a lot of time, I mean there were moments when it felt like a lot of time. There's always that administrative voice in the back of our head saying, okay, we understand. Can we get to the plan now? But we stayed there in that moment. We talked about our students. We talked about what they needed from our program. We talked about where our existing structure was working and where it wasn't. We talked about what we believed the program needed to provide for kids. We spent time developing a shared understanding of what we were actually trying to accomplish. And really, what we were building was collective efficacy around the work. I didn't need the staff to understand what I wanted to change. I needed us to understand together what we were trying to accomplish for students. That's a very different starting point. And then something happened that I think is probably the most important part of this entire conversation. When we finally got to the how, the staff didn't simply buy into my idea, they changed it. They made it much better. I'd walked into the process with a fairly clear picture of what I thought we should do, but the people working closest to our students every single day, they saw things that I didn't see. Of course they did. They're on the front lines of the work. They understood the pieces of the daily student experience that I couldn't understand from my position in exactly the same way. And because we had spent the time developing a shared understanding of the why, their ideas weren't pulling us in another direction. They were making our direction better. We adjusted the plan, and in some cases, what we ultimately did looked pretty different from what I'd originally envisioned. But the vision hadn't changed. The direction hadn't changed. Certainly the purpose didn't change. We all understood what we were trying to accomplish, and that shared understanding gave the people closest to the work the ability to help determine the best way to get there. That experience changed the way I think about buy-in, because we use that phrase constantly in education. We need staff buy-in. And I understand what we mean, but sometimes when leaders say we need buy-in, what we really mean is, I've decided what we're doing, and now I need everyone else to agree with me. That's not really ownership. That's approval. And approval, I mean, it isn't necessarily bad. There are times when leaders have to make decisions, and there are things that simply have to happen. Not every decision needs to become a committee meeting. But that's different from the kind of shared ownership that we're talking about here. This alternative program, that staff, they didn't simply understand the plan well enough to implement it. They understood the purpose well enough to improve it. That's a completely different level of engagement. And when I compare those two experiences from my career, that's probably the biggest difference I see. Early on, I thought my job was to create the vision, explain it, and get the job done. Later, years later, I had learned that sometimes my job was to create enough shared clarity that the people around the problem could see possibilities that I couldn't. The why doesn't just create buy-in. Done well, it gives people the ability to make the idea better. And I think that's an important distinction as we head into our opening meetings this year. Because it's really easy to stand in front of a staff and tell people what we want. We want strong relationships with students. We want better instruction. We want collaboration, and we want students to feel like they belong. But there's a big difference between announcing a priority and developing shared understanding around it. Take something as common as student engagement. Maybe that's one of your building priorities, and we can stand up in August and say, this year we are going to focus on student engagement. Okay. What does that mean? What problem are we seeing? Why does it matter now? Have we noticed anything about the student experience, or what do our teachers already know about this? What are we already doing well? What are we trying to improve already? I mean, all of these conversations take far longer than just putting student engagement on a poster. But they also give people something that they can think with. And that's what we want. Because if people only understand the how, their job is simply implementation. Follow these steps, use this process, complete this form, make the change. But if people understand the why, now they can exercise professional judgment. They can encounter something that we didn't anticipate and still make a decision that moves us in the right direction. They can come back to us and say, I know this is what we originally planned, but based on what we're seeing with students, I think there's a better way. That's not resistance. That's exactly what we should want. That's expertise. And this is where the experience of that opening meeting becomes so important. If one of our priorities this year is collaboration, how much actual collaboration happens while our staff is together? If we want teachers creating classrooms where students have voice, do our teachers have any voice in the conversations that actually affect their work? If you want people asking questions and taking professional risks, what happens when somebody raises a difficult question in front of the group? That's where the meeting itself begins communicating something. And please don't hear me saying that every staff meeting has to become some elaborate interactive activity. It doesn't. Nobody needs another forced icebreaker because we decided meetings should be engaging. Sometimes people genuinely need us to stand up and explain something clearly. Sometimes there's information that everybody needs and they need to have it at the same time. Sometimes there's a 20-minute presentation that's exactly the right leadership move in that moment. But this isn't about making meetings entertaining. It's about being intentional about what we're trying to accomplish. Big difference there. Before we put something on that opening agenda, it helps to understand what kind of thing it actually is. Is this information people simply need to know? Or is this a process people need to understand? Or maybe is it something important enough that we need people to make some meaning of it together? Those are all going to require different amounts of time and different kinds of leadership. The mistake I made early in my career was treating a vision like information. I thought I could just explain it and then move on to implementation. Years later, I understood that if the work really matters, sometimes we need to give people enough space to make the vision their own. And something really interesting can happen when we do. We stop being the only person in the room responsible for figuring everything out. Because the most valuable thing about having your entire staff together isn't that you finally captured everyone's attention, it's that you've gathered everyone's thinking. A captive audience isn't the same thing as an engaged staff, and an engaged staff can do much more than follow a good plan. They can help you build a better one. As we wrap up today, I keep coming back to those two experiences because I think the distance between them says a lot about how leadership changes over time. As a young activities director, I thought I was being efficient. I had a vision, I explained it. Now let's get to work. And eventually, like I said, we got there. But it took most of the year because I'd skipped over something that turned out to matter quite a bit. People needed the opportunity to understand where we were trying to go before I could reasonably expect them to help us get there. Years later, with that alternative program, I finally had enough experience to be a little more patient. We stayed with the why longer. We built a shared understanding around our students and what they needed. And because of that, something happened that I never would have gotten by simply presenting my plan more clearly. The team made the plan better. And I think that's the piece I appreciate the most right now. Early in my career, clarity meant I could explain the plan. Eventually, I learned that real clarity is something different. It's when we understand the purpose well enough that you can challenge my plan and we're still moving toward the same destination. That's a much stronger organization. And maybe that's worth remembering when we gather our staff together again this August. We will have agendas to get through, we will have information to communicate, and we will all have decisions to explain. It's part of the job. But when something really matters, don't confuse explaining it with people understanding it. They aren't the same. Our staff didn't spend the summer inside our heads. They weren't part of every planning conversation. They haven't had months to connect all of the dots that we've already connected. Sometimes we need to give them that opportunity. And if you're willing to do that, you may discover that slowing down at the beginning doesn't slow down the work at all. It may be exactly what allows everyone to move faster together. Thanks for being part of the work, and thank you for spending your time with us here on Your Morning Boost on the Forward Ed Network. We certainly appreciate everything you do for your students and your community. We'll talk with you again next week.
That's your morning boost from AWB Education and Media. If this episode helped you reset your thinking or take your next step forward, share it with a colleague. And don't forget to subscribe so your next boost is ready when you need it. Keep showing up with intention. Keep moving forward, and we'll see you next time.